Hi, I'm Hayley, Chief Doodler at Thoughts Drawn Out. I'm all about getting creativity working so I can help you to make your mark. So when we're talking about visual storytelling, we're really tapping into something quite innate in us as humans in terms of how we make sense of the world. So I talk about visual storytelling having three main domains to it, which is about connecting dots or the synthesis, the sense making. It's that kind of cognitive process. There's the story pit, the narrative, the actual not just making stories, but sharing stories, because that's a very human practice that we've been doing for thousands of years, as well as the making pictures. And I put it down the bottom because I feel like the top two kind of, flow into that making pictures piece. But it's where those three things overlap. That's really what visual storytelling is. And that's the toolkit we're drawing from today. So to kind of go back into why is it so powerful, I'll start with the connecting dots piece. So in our brain, we are kind of wired as pattern finders. We are looking for patterns all the time through information, through people, through our life. We're always searching for the pattern. I kind of think of our brains as like we're raking through the information this way, we rake through that way, and we try to find the pattern through whatever we're looking at. And we're kind of, it kind of goes right back to a primitive survival instinct where we were so good at scanning the landscape for threats. When you are kind of, when you need to be able to identify the scary face that's coming at you versus the smiling face, your brain can identify that faster than anything else, because we are so used to being able to scan and identify the key information that we need. It also kind of rolls through into how we translate the information in our world and the fact that we experience things three-dimensionally. So I don't know if you've ever experienced, but when kids are learning to write, they will often get letters around the wrong way. They'll write D's as B's and P's as Q's and that sort of thing. And that's a very natural part of the brain, because we need to be able to understand all dimensions of an object that we're looking at. There's no point only being able to recognize a lion when it's on the side and running to the left. You need to know what it looks like from the front, from the left, from the right, from behind. So we have this spatial awareness of wanting to understand things three-dimensionally, which is why pictures are faster to translate. Language takes that layer away when it's written word and written text, and makes it two-dimensional, which is why it's harder to learn and it takes longer to process, because our brains want things to be in a 360 view. So an example of this would be if I said to you, picture the Statue of Liberty. Which hand is holding the flame? I could show you two pictures now and you'd recognize both of them as the Statue of Liberty, because it actually doesn't matter, because you appreciate it as a three-dimensional space. And that's what we're getting to with the pictures, is that our brain wants to translate the information into how we understand the world. So we can take a flat icon and translate it into, all right, that flat circle on the page represents a globe. And so in my brain, I get to the three-dimensional globe really quickly, which again is why pictures can be very simple but very quickly related back to what we want them to represent in the human brain. We're kind of wired that way. So building out from that then, so that kind of that pattern finding and our ability to link things through really flows then into storytelling, because story has pattern, and it has pattern that we're really familiar with, and our brains, our subconscious brain often recognizes it before we realize. So once that three-part narrative clicks in, our brain is hooked, and it actually releases dopamine. So when we tap into a narrative of a story that someone is telling, we immediately are looking for the protagonist. We are immediately looking to create a space of empathy, and our brain releases dopamine, which is why you can present the same information as a set of facts, and then you can tell it through the lens of a human and say, you know, flooding affected 30% of homes in Brisbane on the weekend. Here's Gary. Gary's home was in this suburb. Gary now has mud up halfway up his lounge room wall. All of a sudden, now my heart hurts. And when I go away from that information, I'm not going to remember necessarily that percentage. I think I made up 30%. You'll probably remember that there was a percentage, but Gary is what will stay with you, and Gary is what you will picture. So our brains are looking for characters, we're looking for narrative arc, and it causes an emotional reaction that is chemical when we hear that narrative. So all of that then flows through into the making pictures part, in terms of how we found patterns, how we looked for the information, how we looked for the story, the character, the visual metaphor, and then how we put that down onto the page. The making pictures bit can actually be quite simple when it's filtered through those other lenses. Sometimes the simpler the picture, the better. You know, like hieroglyphics was an entire language, and most of those pictures are very, very simple. It wasn't because they were crazy complicated. It wasn't because they had amazing perspective. It's about how you bring in the sense making, the patterns, the stories, and then get it down into a simple form. So what that translates then for your audience when you're making these is that we can make sense of a visual scene in less than 1/10 of a second. It would take almost 3 to 5 times as long for our brains to understand that same information in words alone. So we get the picture first before we'll get the words. And more than 50% of our brain is involved in visual processing. And of all of the sensory connectors we have in our bodies, 70% of them connect into the visual system. So the more visual you make things, the faster people can connect with it, as well as the more sense it will make to them.